mine's still loading on it. But we introduced the concept of what physical properties is all about, which is simply um, it is the balance of water and oxygen in the soil. And so as I'm going to scroll through here through the first parts of what we were working with, and we're looking at physical properties and also with the biologicals, and on this one here we're looking at the different pieces of the puzzle. All right, and first we start with the plant, and this is really what it's all about. If you the plant itself, it has to make its own energy. It has to make its, and it does this through photosynthesis. So what does it do in photosynthesis? It takes in, the leaf takes in water vapor and carbon dioxide. It needs nitrogen, excuse me, a few other elements. And through the magic of photosynthesis, converts that carbon then into sucrose and glucose, the simple sugars, the building blocks that it needs. Now, if that is all that the plant does, then the plant dies, because it has to take that sugar and convert it into the energy on the cellular level so that each of the cells that comprise the plant can live, which is exactly the same process that our cells within us as individuals has to go through as well. So the plant creates its sugars, stores it primarily in its root system, that's its warehouse, then distributes it to the cells as needed in order to live. And so what does it need? Well, on photosynthesis, we take in carbon dioxide and water vapor, and what do we respire? The plant respires oxygen and water vapor. When it starts converting the sugars into energy, then it requires oxygen, because it's going to oxidize it. And so it takes in oxygen, and it sends the oxygen and the sugar to each cell of the plant, and that's how it converts into energy. And also then uses phosphorus as part of the ADP and ATP cycle on it. So these things then we have to provide. If we want to have roots, as a for instance, the leaf tissue cannot supply the roots with the oxygen. The roots, in order for the roots, the cells to be able to live, they have to be able to access the oxygen from the soil itself. And therein lies what we're talking about in terms of physical properties, because more times than not, the one limiting factor for healthy roots and healthy plants is an inadequate supply of soil oxygen. So that's kind of where we were starting with. And this seminar is going to start getting more in terms of, okay, mechanically, how do we do that? But in any event, what we're going through, we have the soils, all right, we also have to have sunlight. If we don't have sunlight, we don't have photosynthesis, so it all starts. Water quality becomes important as well, because if I have a saturated soil, what's going to happen? The only oxygen that's in that saturated soil is going to be in suspension of the water. And everything that is living in that soil, be it my grass roots, my bacteria, my fungi, and all the other microbes, they are competing for that oxygen. And so it's quickly consumed. So how do I replenish it? Well, for all intents and purposes, I cannot, because in order to replenish it, the oxygen has to come from the atmosphere. 26% of the atmosphere is oxygen. But if it's loaded with water, it can't diffuse into it. And so what happens, we have the water, but now the plant is literally drowning in it, because just like a fish that goes into oxygen deficient water, it literally drowns, so too for our plant. So the quality of the air becomes important, and nutritional. All these things then go into what we need. We then went through the pore spaces, how we have large pores and small pores, and the small pores are the water holders and the large one are the air pores, and the ones in between are going to flip to either air or water depending upon our microclimate. What does that mean? Microclimate, remember, is direct sunlight and also surface airflow. The two of them together directly impact evaporation. So if I have really good evaporation, drawing water out of the soil and quickly drying it, then those medium-sized pores are going to turn into air pores. And if I got a stagnant environment, then they're going into water pores. And those water pores, like I say, they help drive out the oxygen, and I can't replenish it. So here, remember, we went through on the roots and how the system itself is locked up. Yes, sir.
Robert, sorry, just if you could speak more slowly, the interpreter would appreciate it.
I'm sorry. Of course.
Sorry, no, it's okay. But if not, she has to hurry a lot.
No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry. No, that's fine. I'm glad you came in because I need to know this.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem. Yeah, let me know again if I start going too fast for the interpreter. So to recap, then, we're typically what would be an ideal soil for growing sports grasses, whether it be on a golf green or say a football pitch. Typically, we were told 50% solids and 50% pore space, of which would be evenly divided between air and water pores. In reality, it's not a 50-50. It's more of a 55-45 solids to pores, or sometimes it's not uncommon for it to be a 60-40. Okay. So early on, the 55-45 is fairly common, of which 30% are air pores and 15% are water pores. And then as we age, then it flips, okay? And this is where it becomes important for us to start thinking in terms of, okay, why does it age like this? It ages like this because the grass plant itself is destroying its environment. How does it do that? Well, it's creating organic matter, biomass, thatch, root mat, other plant material, and these things it's generally growing in the air pores, and as a consequence, this organic matter is being deposited in the air pores, and so the air pores are being changed into water pores, and that's how we change the composition of the soil itself. The air pores are very important to us because they provide space for root growth, gravitational water movement. So when we look at the infiltration rate, we're measuring the gravitational flow. And then it also gives us, the space where our oxygen is. Our water pores are very important to us because that is where our water balance happens to be. So in this situation here, where it's 15% air and 25% water, unless this particular green, for instance, is out in the open where it is exposed to all-day sun and it has excellent surface airflow to evaporate the excess water, it's going to be out of balance. It's going to be out of balance. It's going to have too much water and not enough oxygen in it. So we got to do something. We have to do something to help reinstill the balance of air to water in that particular root zone. So where we would like to get is about a 20-20, and this is just a rough rule of thumb. We can make it work if we don't have that 20% air. Let's go back. Let's say we're at the 15% air. Does this mean that you can't grow high quality turf? The answer is no. You can. But what it does mean is that it's going to put more pressure on your aerification program. Does that necessarily mean that you have to be pulling plugs during the course of the year? The answer again is no. What you're going to have to be doing is you're going to have to be venting in some fashion, whether it be with a deep slicer like a Sisis, or maybe, or you can use a Planet Air, which is very common here in North America. You can use all different forms of solid tines, be it a needle tine or a bayonet tine, or the star tine that goes in like like that. And a lot of superintendents like the star tine. These are fine. If you haven't have a hydroject, they still exist, and that's an excellent tool for venting a green. Eventually, you will want to still have to do your core aerification, because what it's saying is, as you are testing from a year to year and you're seeing how you're changing, then now what it's telling you is that decomposition alone is not keeping me in balance. So I'm going to have to mechanically remove some material too. So that's really kind of how we're analyzing this. So we're looking at infiltration rates of 6 to 8. That's a good range for a green that's in the open. If we have one that's got more shade, it's got poor air, then I'm probably going to be, I'd like to be more in terms of 200 millimeters an hour and higher. I'm going to want to be more in the neighborhood of maybe 350 millimeters and higher, that type of thing. Okay. And so it becomes a matter of trying to balance the physical properties then with our microclimate in order to help you be able to grow high quality turf and maintain it for your golfing public. So this is where we went through on the last time and showing this was a private backyard golf green built to USGA specifications, and you can see where an organic layer had already formed within the first year, and this is very normal. Excuse me. And it was sealing off, it was starting to seal off the ability of water to be able to penetrate. And when I look at, for instance, I'll give you an aside. When I look at the physical properties and I'm looking at the balance of infiltration rate to air porosity to water porosity, the infiltration rate to me is more than just a direct measurement of the ability of water to penetrate the surface and flow through the sample. It is also an indirect measurement of how easily oxygen can penetrate the soil and reoxygenate the soil itself. And so it gives me an indirect measurement of the ability of for the aerification. Excuse me. So we're looking at how easily can soil gases be released and oxygen rediffused in the soil. Here is a classic example of the basic properties of high organic contents, which organic matter swells with hydration. And with the swelling, it fills the pore space and it starts slowing down my water penetration and my ability of oxygen to penetrate the soil. When these samples were actually came into the lab, they were flat. And then part of the testing process, we put them into the water bath prior to putting them on the penetrometer, which is the device that we use to test for the infiltration rate. And you can see here where, we've got a good 3 to 4 millimeters of expansion on the top, and all that was strictly by hydration. The organic matter wants to absorb and expand with water, and that's a classic example of it right there. All right, so then we basically have have our questions is, how frequently do I aerify? What size of tines do I use? What type of spacing do I use? How often do I use it? Do they need to have hollows or solids? And my Spanish isn't great right now, so you can go through that list on it. But these are questions that you should be asking yourself. And this here is just an example. We're going to get through this a little bit more because this was part of the original presentation, and just showing you how organic matter moves, how it forms, what it looks like. When you're pulling your cups, as a for instance, you should be looking for layering, all right? And you can have it on all forms, like this one here is forming at the top in the thatch layer. What's going on is that right in here, that's your traffic compaction is compressing that area of the thatch and the root mat. And then you may also have some chemistry involved here. Excuse me for a second. where what we've learned is that sodium itself wants to deflocculate our organic matter and our clay. What does that mean? It means it wants to pull it apart into smaller components. And once the organic matter and the clays are pulled apart into their smaller individual components, they flow with the water, and they can start contaminating the air pores. In this situation here, this green happens to be fairly young, and it hasn't started migrating yet. But we do start seeing a situation where we want to start monitoring now the chemistry as well. Here we have different types of verification holes, the bisecting of this organic layer. You see down in here where the organic was pushed down through aerification. And these are just more examples of the value of aerification and how it starts impacting on the things that we are working with, i.e. our root zones and our soils themselves. So hopefully this works on this. Let me back up. This is supposed to be, all right, our video is not running here. But what he's doing, what it's showing is him,
sorry, Robert, but it's not possible to run a video. The software doesn't let it. It's because the width.
As long as I know, I can describe it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so we're going on to this one, so I can describe it. What you see here, these holes right here. All right, this is, first of all, this is something that you can do. Instead of having to have a drill and fill machine come in, and you can actually get yourself your elongated bits, and you can do the equivalent of a drill and fill by hand if you choose to. And that's what this is showing. And so what we did is we start out with a 4x8 piece of plywood, a half-inch piece of plywood, and that was a little bit too unwieldy. So they basically made a box and they cut it down a little bit, all right, put handles on it. And then they drilled in holes so you'd have a guide to go through and be able to drill each one. All right, bring the material up to the top, and then what do you do after that? You can pick it up and you can dump it to the side. In this particular case, this is on Maggie Valley, which is here in the States. They got down to a hard pan, and this hard pan had been cemented so that this is what the drill brought up. And that hard pan was impervious to water, would not let it go. So it was just sitting there, and the water would go down, hit this particular area, and you ended up with the equivalent of a bird bath, or a bowl that's just holding water and that went stagnant, and then went anaerobic, and then the gases that were created by anaerobic microbial activity came to the surface, and it was poisoning the grass. So they felt, well, we have nothing to lose. Let's see if we can't get through that hard pan and get the water moving and see if that does not take care of our problem. And that's what they were doing. And in point of fact, it worked. And these were push-ups, as you can see, native soils that had been modified with sand on top, and they were able to get through it. Now, I want to go back and just show that one more time. So he's drilling down. He's starting out right there. You know, this is just showing it done without the box and the template. The box then gives you an easy way to pick up and dump the remnants over on the side to where in a cart or whatever else, so you can move it off site. And then you can come across with the box itself if you want. Excuse me. You can put sand in there and then start dragging the sand into the holes right over the top of it. So it makes it kind of an easy way of being able to do a drill and fill the hard way. Now, this is a modified push-up green, and what you're seeing right here is how the organic matter that's in the sand that has been applied through top dressing over the years is just become hard as a rock. And so just like we were showing before, how organic matter expands with hydration, well, it also contracts. And so when it expands with hydration, the surface becomes mushy. And when it dries out, starts contracting, it gets rock hard. So the problem that you as a superintendent have when you have a high organic surface area is like, how do I water it? If I want to get my water down to where I don't have to be dragging hose, you know, multiple times during the day, then my surface is getting too wet. But if I just limit the amount of moisture that's there, then my surface dries out very quickly, and so I have to bring the hose in, because if I don't, then it gets too doggone hard, and then my golfers don't like that either. So it's a constant problem as to putting down enough water to help sustain the grass, but not so much that the surface gets too soft for the player, and then monitoring it closely so I'm out there watering it again before it gets too hard when my plant starts desiccating. All right, so the compaction that we're seeing, my good friend Joe Farina up in Boston, he and his daughters and Dave Doherty, my partner, they cut out these footprints, and then they followed the first foursome out on this golf course, and they laid out where every footprint was, and you can see right around the hole, you know, the most activity, and then they calculated the amount of compaction, and the amount of compaction they figured was equivalent to a brontosaurus or the PSI of a Sherman tank, and that's what you're looking at. So one of the things that the reason why we go to sand, and not all sands are created equal for our purposes. The reason why we look for a USGA compliant sand is because we can put a Sherman tank or a brontosaurus on it in terms of equivalent compaction, and it will still be able to breathe and drain. So that's the whole purpose of it, is to be able to maintain the balance of oxygen and water while it's compacted. All right, I'm going to move on a little bit here. Biomass, you know, and this is the layering in it. Just as an FYI, right, you can see right below the surface area, there's kind of a little red tinge on it. That could be roots, but it could also be a little bit of iron. We open it up here, and we see. I mean, this sample was extremely hard when Dave and I opened it up, and it's just completely locked up with organic. And at that time, which this had been about 1995 when we did this, we didn't know about the impact of chemistry. So if you go back to the beginning, for our when we're putting in the different pieces of the puzzle, where we're at now is we're able to not only look strictly at the soil physics, but also the impact of water quality on the soil physics, and the impact of water quality and the soil physics then on fertility. So we're starting to bring the puzzle parts all together for the very, very first time. And here, for this to be as hard as it was, what we didn't know at that time is we've got something going on there chemically as well as physically, and the chemistry is helping to cement that soil. All right, more of the same, showing it, how organic layer, that particular sample was completely sealed off. I mean, we didn't get any water through it at all. And that's all the thicker it was. All right, so I'm going to move a little bit further on. So here, if you want disease, ladies and gentlemen, it's very simple. Water and heat gives us the humidity that becomes a beautiful and perfect incubator for diseases such as anthracnose, such as pythium, such as root rot. So if I want to have disease, all I need to have water and heat. How do I get that? If I am shallow watering, then what happens mechanically? Mechanically, my water, as soon as the sun comes out, it starts heating my surface. It starts evaporating the water at the surface. The water at the surface then turns from being a liquid into a gas. And if I don't have the surface airflow, then those water droplets that are now in suspension are sitting right there, grass level. The sun comes through it. You can think about each droplet as being the equivalent of a little magnifying glass, and it literally intensifies the rays of the sun, so that now we are starting to cook our grass plant, and then as the sun is there, the heat is starting to radiate up, but that moist area right above it also then radiates the heat back, and so you have an oven effect, and so my temperature at the surface can be 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the ambient temperature. But if I have the good surface airflow that's wicking away that water, that becomes a cooling effect. And the cooling effect can be as much as 10 degrees cooler than the ambient temperature. This becomes a very big deal. So because if I'm sitting there with, say, I can't do my conversions right now, but let's say a 90-degree Fahrenheit day, and the airflow can make the difference between whether or not that plant has its stomata open and is still actively creating sugars through photosynthesis, or whether it's too hot and is shut down. The stomata is gone into maintenance mode. It is no longer, the photosynthesis has stopped. And so now the only way for that plant to live is for that plant to consume the sugars that it has stored in its warehouse, which is its root system. And so this is where we maintain that the primary cause of our summer root dieback comes from the consumption of the warehouse. We think of it in terms of heat. Heat is one way of looking at it, but the actual cause is the fact that the plant has to protect itself from being desiccated. So it closes the stomata and it shuts down its activity, all activity except for the need to live. Okay? So all that humidity not only is now cooking my grass, which is making it weaker, but now is an ideal incubator for the disease. And so now we have the double whammy where the disease is starting to pop up, and it's also got a weak grass right there, and so we have ourselves our problems. So one of the things you'd ideally like to do, of course, is cool down and dry out that surface area. And in order to do that, we've got to be able to get our water deeper. Okay. So I'm going to start getting to our areas of what we want to, in terms of mechanically, how do we address this mechanically? This here we had on the last, getting toward the end of the last seminar, and it's just showing, the organic and how it can just loads things up. And one of the things we have here in the second one down, where terrible odor. Oh gosh, I mean, it stunk like a sewer. Now, in order for your soil to smell like a sewer, there has to be sulfur present, because the odor is from hydrogen sulfide. And hydrogen sulfide is one of the gases that is created during anaerobic activity. But in order for it to be produced, there has to be sulfur in the soil. Sometimes the source of that sulfur is our water. Other times, it's if our water is low in sulfur, it's actually in our inputs. Gypsum, for instance, would be a common source. Ca, calcium, SO, sulfur, O4. CaSO4 is gypsum. So when it goes into the soil, the idea is I'm using my calcium to treat my sodium, so it's got to pop off the gypsum, and it also pops off the sodium. Now that sodium is in a position where the anaerobic bacteria is now using it to create hydrogen sulfide. Let me regress one point, because we haven't talked about this. What happens with, how do we get an anaerobic condition? An anaerobic condition is, by definition, the lack of available oxygen, or free oxygen, free soil oxygen. That doesn't mean that there isn't oxygen in the soil. It just means that it's not readily plant available, or available to anything else that's living in the soil. So the bacteria in particular, when we eat up the free-floating O2 in the soil, the bacteria are going to start looking for other compounds that have oxygen as part of them. That SO4 is a classic example. It's going to want that oxygen. It's going to want to pull it off, because it needs that oxygen in order for it to live. It has to have the oxygen to be able to eat the organic matter. That is called aerobic, decomposition. Decomposition, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, requires oxygen for that bacteria, for the fungi, for the other microbes that are living in the soil. And as a byproduct of it, when we have like the SO4, you're going to have hydrogen sulfide. You'll always have carbon dioxide, which in a low oxygen environment is highly toxic to the roots, and you're definitely going to have methane as part of it as well. These three, but in particular the carbon dioxide and the methane, are always going to be present. And then there are also going to be other gases as well, but those are your primaries that are going to cause it. And so when you smell that odor, you know you have hydrogen sulfide. All right, can I move this thing? There we go. Okay, so now we're talking about aerification. All right, because this is what it leads to. Okay, how do I inject oxygen into the soil? All right, there's two ways mechanically. One, we already talked about it. It's either venting, which is just punching a hole in some fashion. All right, and so that's what this is over here. You punch a hole, and what does it do? We push it in, and then we have the compaction going laterally like this and like this into it. So what happens? Well, the holes themselves will stay open about 2 days, maybe 3, and then they'll just collapse in on themselves. So the benefit is very temporary, but not without great value, because while they're there, we're introducing oxygen, we're allowing water to penetrate, and we're giving space for the roots, for the plant to be able to develop deeper roots. So all these things are beneficial. When we are pulling a tine, we're actually physically moving this material out, and so that relieves compaction. That's why the arrows are pointing toward the holes here, okay? And so we have a relief of compaction with it. Now, if I've got a lot of organic matter and I come across and I go ahead and I water it, remember the expansion and contraction with hydration? Well, with hydration, that's going to close off those hollow tine holes a lot. I'm sure you've probably seen it where you come across with a larger hollow tine, pulled the plugs, and by the time you came back to fill those holes with sand, they've collapsed down to a much smaller tine, and that's because of the expansion of the organic matter. All of these things are beneficial to us. You've seen, I'm sure, around whether it be a solid tine hole or a hollow tine hole, how the grass greens up. Why does that occur? Well, it's because it's a healthier environment. The grass is greener because that grass around those holes happens to be healthier. Why is it healthier? First and foremost is because it's got oxygen that the plant needs in order to in order to do what it needs in order to live. So it also gives it space for deeper root growth. It gives it water down deeper, so it becomes a healthier environment for the plant's roots. But there's something else going on. It's also a healthier environment for the microbes. So they're decomposing, aerobically decomposing the organic matter that's all around that hole. What are some of the byproducts of aerobic decomposition? Well, we have nutrients such as nitrogen and secondaries and microbes that are tied up in organic form. And while they're in organic form, they are unavailable to our roots. But once the bacteria starts breaking it down through aerobic decomposition, then those nutrients are freed up and they are placed into compounds that now the roots can absorb. And so the plant around the holes is also being fed, getting more nitrogen in particular than the plant that is not around those holes. So that's another reason why it's greening up. So the benefits of aerification are many, and is not to be overlooked. So what we have here then is that I think this just repeating what we've already said, and we go into, and so it becomes an issue. Remember, on our 7 questions, it's okay, how tight do I go? Well, we have a 1/4 inch would be about a 3 millimeter hollow tine measured on outside diameter. And if we go 1 1/4 by 1 1/4 inch, it gives us a 3.14% displacement. Okay, and we see that the old the 1/2 inch on 2 1/2 by 2 1/2 is also 3.14. And if we went with a 1 inch vertidrain on 5 by 5, which is pretty solid, is standard, or with a drill and fill, then that's also 3.14. So it's all of a sudden you're going, what happens, if, I can use a smaller tine then on tighter spacing and end up affecting the same amount of surface area. Well, now what we have is we have the Toro Procore 648 in particular, and so we have even more options available to us in terms of spacing. So like this 1 1/2 by 1 1/2, this here would be using the 6 tine blocks, all right? And the 1 1/4 by 1 1/4 would be using the 10 tine blocks. This is probably too tight, by the way. 1 1/4 by 1.75 would probably be as tight as you'd want to go. But here, look at this. I can use a 1/2 inch tine And on this type of spacing, and I can get 8.73% surface displacement, and I can pull with that Procore 3 to 4 inches of material. Well, that's pretty good. Now, on the old standard 2x2 using the 5/8, well, then shoot, all I would have gotten was 7.67. So I get 1% more. Is that a lot? No. But the fact of what's very important is that when I'm using cool season grasses like a bent grass or a Poa annua, then I can use the 1/2 inch on a little bit tighter spacing. I can affect the same amount of area as the larger tine, and this 1/2 inch tine is going to heal in about 10 to 14 days, where this 5/8 inch tine could take as much as another 2 weeks more, another 10 to 14 days longer. So from a golfer's perspective, this 1/2 inch is a big deal because of the healing time. If this grass is actively growing, the faster healing time, is very beneficial for the club, and the golfers themselves will be very thankful for it. Now, when we're working with, some of you are going to have your sand-based greens. And the question becomes should I be doing a deep drill or do a deep vertidrain, hollow core? And the answer is we don't know. This is where you want to be able to test. Our testing at ISTRC, for instance, is in 4-inch lifts. So we call the first tier 0 to 4 inch, the second tier 4 to 8, and the third tier 8 to 12. Okay. So that would be 30 centimeters or 300 millimeters, full 12 inches. And so I break that down. So the first tier is 100 millimeters. The second tier is 100 to 200 millimeters, and the third tier is 200 to 300 millimeters. All right, great. And then that way we can isolate if we have any problems by where it actually happens to be within the soil profile. If you pull a PVC and send it into a lab and have them do a physical evaluation on it, and they may come back, well, I've got an infiltration rate of, let's say, 10 inches an hour. You don't know for sure where that 10 inches an hour is. It could be in the top, and more likely than not it is, but not always. I've had situations where I've had, a good, 200 millimeters an hour going through the top, and it drops down to the 10 inches, at the 200 to 300 millimeter depth. So that would be okay. Then it makes sense to do a deep drill. Why not a vertidrain? Because the vertidrain is really only effective from 8 to 10 inches deep. It takes a drill to be able to get down to the 12th inch to be able to open it up completely. And you can also do a drill and fill to where it can actually pour it in. Or you can do it yourself. Remember, going back to our gentleman there at Maggie Valley with the handheld drill, you can do it yourself too. And it may not be necessary to do the entire green. The first place you want to start is actually in your collection areas. If there's going to be an area that's going to lock up first, it's going to be in the collection area of a sand-based green. Now, but we always recommend you test first because it may not be necessary. Now, you have a modified soil green, and say, would deep drilling or deep corification be beneficial? In this situation, the answer is yes. And 90% of the time, it is going to be very beneficial to you, and it's probably not necessary for you to test a second or third tier to be able to get that benefit. The problem you have with a hollow tine is generally it can be so hard, the soil can be so hard down below that you can't pull a plug. So the drilling becomes your option. Again, if you don't have the ability to contract for a drill and fill machine, again, you have the option of doing it yourself if you choose. So we're looking at the elimination of organic, but we're looking at how do we do it? Now, this particular chart here is actually is actually an Excel spreadsheet, okay? So that it allows you to be able to plug in what your size holes are and what your spacing happens to be on center, and it'll automatically calculate for you what your total displacement. Yeah, here 25.24%, given the the tines and the spacing that we're projecting for May, June, and September. It'll also calculate the gradient. You have to plug in your blade size, which is either going to be a 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, or a 3 millimeter in size. So this we can make this available to you through Javier. He's going to have to change this from English into Spanish, but we can make this available to you so you could have that particular chart.
Okay, sorry, Bob. We have just 5 minutes plus questions.
All right, good.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay, it's no. If you want, we can do the questions at the end.
Whatever you like. If they have questions right now, let's take them now.
No, because it's just 5 minutes, so we can do the question at the end of your presentation. If you
all right,
if you agree. Okay. Yours.
All right, I've got it now. So anyway, but why you and I are talking here is running through so that they can read the screen itself. All right, and what we want to do is whenever we take that aerifier out of the shop, we want to make sure that we're making the most use of it, and we do not always have to be pulling a core in order to be effective. But we can do different things when we are pulling a core. Remember, we were talking about the spacing, and even if you have an older Toro aerifier such as this one, you can reset it with different size tines. So like this one here went between 1/2 inch and 3/8 inch, and they went every other one, and making a bit of a difference. All right, and so you could see the difference. They were pulling more material because they were able to keep a tighter spacing on this particular aerifier. On the pressure plates, they had to adjust the pressure plates though. Okay, that's one thing you have to kind of watch out for. And in order to be able to increase the amount of surface displacement that they were able to affect with this type of thing. You can see where when we first started, the root depth was not terribly great, not bad, but not terribly great. But after we got done with it and came back through again, then all of a sudden we were doubling root depth on it. Dave uses this lips balm packet here because that's 1.5 inches wide, so it gives you a sense of what you're looking at in terms of size, and then the size of the hole itself. But this is one thing you can do. Even if you don't have the latest equipment, you can still use the older equipment and modify it to your particular purposes. And then what happened was one of the things, here's a chart that Jeff Eldridge had put together on the healing between the large tines. This is what this is. This is your 1/2 inch, and this was a 5/8, and that's where we get the thing where we can heal so much faster. In terms of real dollars, I mean, we did put together this chart here as to what it can mean to the club itself. In terms of total revenues, and this is only for greens fees. This is not including lost revenue at the clubhouse or at the pro shop or anything like that. So the difference here would be a 22,000 U.S. difference, you know, and in terms of because of the faster healing using the smaller tines on tighter spacing. So it's one of the reasons why it becomes such a very important thing is trying to do things that are more golfer friendly. So I think this is a good ending point for us right now, Javier, to start taking questions.
Okay, great. Just let me check it. So Julio Roldan has several questions. He is asking about which is the best sand material or amendment to top dress rinse.
What you want to use is you want to use a sand that complies with the USGA's, the Golfers Association's specifications for a sand. Now, for a top dressing sand, what I would ideally like to see, very little, less than 1%, that is 1 millimeter in size or larger. I would like to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% that would be a 1/4 millimeter to 1 millimeter in size. Reason why is that normally what I'm doing is for my top dressing, I already have enough organic in the soil because that's what's been produced by my grass. And so what I need is air pores. And the 1/4 to 1 millimeter size gives me the most stable air pores that I can get. And that's why I want to maximize that for my top dressing sand. Now, from my 0.15 millimeter to 0.25 millimeter size, I'd like to have that no more than 15%. And then passing the 0.15 millimeter, I would like nothing more than 3% or less total. So this would be very fine sand, silt, and clay added together. And that will give you a very good top dressing sand. Now, lots of times you can't find that because that's not an easy sand to produce. What you want to try and stay away from as much as possible is the fine end, the material that is actually passing that's smaller than 0.18 millimeter in size. So those are exclusive water holders, and for a top dressing sand you don't need that, and so you want to try and stay away from that as much as possible. It's always available to you if you want to contact us. I mean, Carlos here in the ISTRIC lab, he's our lab manager for the undisturbed core testing. He's originally from Mexico, and he certainly can act as the interpreter between us. And if you want to, email me the test results of your particular sand that you're looking at, we can tell you whether it's a good-looking sand or not.
Okay, great. Okay,
so that's always available.
Yeah, you're right. Whoever wants your email address, he can ask me.
Email address.
Okay.
Yep. Email address would be ROPPOLD@istrc.com.
Okay, great. I'll send them. Okay, just another question. So, which is the best way to hold coring or solid shining in two situations? Dry and firm, one situation, and soft and wet. When the soil profile is dry and firm, or soft and wet. Which would be the best way to do in both cases?
Normally, you want to have it toward the drier side. If it's soft and wet, you're running a risk of having more lifting of the turf. To some extent, it's dependent upon, first and foremost, the depth of your roots. If they're very, very shallow, you're gonna lift your turf on it. And so whether it's soft and wet or firm and dry, I don't think it's probably going to make any difference whatsoever on you. But I think in general, staying toward, you don't have to be completely dry, but staying drier, I guess maybe a better way of saying it, is probably going to be preferable for you. And one of the things that you can do when you're getting ready to do, to core aerify, you about 3 days ahead of time, put down a starter fertilizer that is emphasizing your phosphorus and your potassium. Phosphorus and potassium are necessary for cell structure, and also again uh, 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 energy production as well. So what they do, I mean, this would be a typical starter type of fertilizer is what you want to put down, so that the plant has enough time to take it up, so that when you come across the hollow tine and you're stressing out your plant, then you're going to be dragging in your sand and into the holes and filling it with a good USGA compliant sand. Then you can come across and water that all in and settle it down, and maybe you get a very light shot of nitrogen. Now the plant has the foundation that it needs in order to be able to recover. So that's one of the things you can do. The other thing is you always want to make sure that you've cut your turf down tightly ahead of time, because that way when you're dragging in the sand, you reduce the amount of leaf tissue that the sand is going to cut and stress. You would also do this, interestingly enough, if you have a soccer pitch or any kind of sports field. You would want to do the same type of thing and cut down the turf closely before you'd actually come across the sand and want to drag in the holes. And of course, you always, always, always want to harvest the plugs. You do not want to drag them back in the holes. If you're going to go through this, all the effort of being able to pull the plugs, you have got to harvest those plugs and get them out of there.
Great. Julio Ordan is asking about your opinion introducing air with an air compressor.
This would be like your Air 2 G2, yeah, which is becoming quite common here in the States. And we've been following that since the machine was starting to be developed. And it's a very nice tool. It is often oversold, in our opinion. So we have some of their salespeople in the field saying that if you use the Air 2 G2 and you do not have to hollow core aerify again. That is not true. It is a wonderful tool. You can inject air sideways at multiple depths, taking it down. It is a slow tool, but from what we see, and you can see yourself, you can actually see the turf rise, so you're getting some compaction relief. You can see the response with it. They use some of our testing that they bought to show that there is an effect, but we haven't seen it often enough to where we're going to actually say this is exactly what you're going to get when you use it. You still have to get that organic matter out of the soil. Pure and simple. So yes, do we recommend the machine? We certainly do. Do we recommend it as being the only thing you need to use? Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you. And the last question from Joaquin Berjano: if you were available to aerate just once per year, which would your best preference? Spring, summer, autumn?
Oh gosh, that depends on where you're at. I'll give you a couple of examples. If I was in South America and I'm looking at, a spring or fall, I'm generally going to be at a higher elevation. I would tend to think that I'm going to have the same issues there as I would have, say, in Montana, Calgary, Alberta, upstate New York, Montreal, Toronto. The bottom line is very simple. Spring it's very difficult in our most northern climates, in our most southern climates, to be able to count on having a decent spring to where I could actually, can year to year can count on getting in there and core aerify. If you can do it, that's great. But I think it's safer to do it in the fall. And if you can only do it once in the fall, then what I would probably start thinking of doing, if I'm, you know, some of you may have a Bermuda grass, and if you're working with a Bermuda grass and you want to use a 5/8 tine on the 6-tine block for the Pro course, set to 1.5 and 2, or you can set it at 2.2. If I'm doing it with a bent grass or a Poa annua, I'm going to use a 1/2 inch outside diameter tine, and I'm going to, in this instance, what I would do is I would do a 2x2, and then I'd come across with a second pass. And if I can do the second pass at about 33 degrees, why 33 degrees? Because it will minimize the number of holes that I would hit a second time. And another way of saying, maximize the amount of ground that I'm going to affect. So I'm going to do a double pass. Now, how would I do that? I would come across the first time, pull the plugs. I'd go ahead and I would harvest the plugs, come across, and I'd fill the holes with sand. Then I'd come across with my double pass. Do I have to do it immediately? No. I could give myself a couple of days to give the grass a little bit of chance to rest, 2 or 3 days, give it a chance to rest. I can do it if everything is firm enough after I harvest the plugs. If I still have a very firm surface, I could do the double pass then bring across the sand and fill all of the holes at the same time after I harvest the second pass plugs. But that's what I would do. I would be looking more at the fall. Now in the spring, I can still do my solid tines, my venting. I want to start my venting, and I want to start it early. If I start my venting early, then I can generally continue that all the way through into the fall. I can get through my hot months. And so in the northern climes, I would probably be looking at starting my venting in April, no later than May. And in the south, I just, I flip it. I'm looking at starting in October. So when early spring is when I'd start opening it up. I wouldn't be pulling a plug. And then if I needed to have some relief, during the year, and actually remove a little bit more organic matter, what I could do is I take a 3mm OD small hollow quad, and I could use that instead of a solid tine. Just pull the plugs, blow them off, harvest them, leave the hole open. If I have a little tufting, do a light rolling, the golfers won't even know you've been there. And that's how you can supplement your one time with the larger tines.
Okay, that was the last question. So thank you again Bob for your collaboration. I'm sure that for sure there would be a third and a fourth part of your presentation, because it's endless, because it's of course a really interesting topic. So let's talk for a third part if you agree.
Well,
in the near future.
Well, I would put it out to the members that are still attending. With this computer of mine, I mean, it's battery powered, and in the Wi-Fi, I'm not hooked up to a wire. We could actually do a seminar on the lab and how samples go through the lab and how the testing is done. Because we've got the camera right here, we can actually show this.
That would be really great. That's a great idea. We could think about it. Yes.
Yeah, give us some thought about it and see if that would be of value to everybody. Because we could do that, and it does. Yeah. It does help to have an understanding of what the test, because I could do that in the context of what the tests mean. So that it make it easier to help do the interpretation.
Okay. So yeah, we could do that. So let's talk about it.
All right, that'd be fine.
Okay, great. So again, thank you very much. Let me say some words in Spanish to say goodbye to attendees.
Oh, one last thing. Can I do one last advertisement?
Yes.
For anybody who is going to the Golf Industry Show in San Antonio, Texas, this coming February. The larger oxygen seminar, of which this one here is a part, is being presented by Dave Doherty and myself on Monday morning.
Okay.
Then Dave and I have a seminar on Tuesday morning. Both of these are 4 hours. It is on the do's and don'ts of building greens. Okay, basically sand-based greens.
Yeah.
And then on Tuesday afternoon, it's going to be remediating soil chemistry issues. This is done with Carlos Arroyo, who's the superintendent at Belle Reve, and myself. And so that's Tuesday afternoon for 4 hours. And it gets into, okay, so we've got iron, so we got carbonate, so that we got salt, so that we got sodium. And how do I get rid of it?
Okay.
And that's what that's going to be all about.
Okay. Great seminars. Okay, so thank you again for your collaboration. Let me say something. Pues nada, como veis con Robert Oppold no terminaremos nunca, es una fuente de conocimiento inagotable. O sea que, bueno, él ha propuesto de hacer un próximo webinar viendo el proceso de análisis de las muestras que reciben, lo cual lo considero bastante interesante. Bueno, ya lo iremos hablando con él a ver de qué manera la podríamos preparar. Pues por mi parte, nada más. Pues nada, agradeceros de nuevo vuestra presencia. Y nada, pues vuestra presencia y la ayuda de los patrocinadores, como siempre, que es imprescindible para que todos nosotros pues vayamos aprovechándonos del conocimiento de estos profesionales que son increíbles. Muchas gracias a Carlota, que me parece que hoy ha sufrido porque a Robert le gusta... Bueno, hablar bastante rápido, o sea que bueno, espero que la traducción haya sido de vuestro agrado. Y pues nada, por mi parte, de nada, Carlota. Pues espero que haya sido de vuestro agrado y nos vemos. Ya estaremos estar al corriente de los próximos webinars, que los iremos colgando en la página web de Campos del Césped. Y nos vamos encontrando en estas píldoras formativas. Thank you very much again, Robert. See you soon.
You're welcome.
Keep in touch.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bueno, pues muchas gracias a todos y hasta la próxima. Adiós. Bye bye.